For many American viewers who grew up in the 1990s, what they remember about Chuck Norris is not a movie, but a very familiar image. The Texas Ranger badge, the cowboy hat, the Dodge Ram, and a man who always showed up at exactly the right moment to end everything with a spinning roundhouse kick. Walker, Texas Ranger, is not remembered simply for solving cases, catching criminals, or telling weekend cop stories. It is remembered because it turned Chuck Norris from a martial arts movie star into a family television icon. An icon parents could watch with their kids on Saturday night. An icon Southern fathers loved because the Texas identity was so strong. And also an icon that a younger generation later turned into memes, clipped into jokes, and accidentally gave a whole new afterlife. But the more people look back after Chuck Norris is gone, the more they see that behind this series, which seemed so simple on the surface, was a much more complicated history. It grew out of an earlier feature film. It almost ran into legal trouble because it was too similar to the original. One of its famous co-creators walked away after only a few weeks. It aired in a time slot many people in the industry considered a graveyard for ratings, and somehow it still won. That is why today we are not just looking back at Walker, Texas Ranger as an old television show. We are looking back at the machine that helped Chuck Norris create the most durable image of his entire life. Number 1. The heir to Lone Wolf. To understand where Walker, Texas Ranger really began, you have to go back to 1983 and Lone Wolf McQuade. In that film, Chuck Norris played J.J. McQuade, a lone Texas Ranger, stubborn, independent, working his own way, driving a pickup truck, hating procedure, and dealing with criminals through grit and fighting skill. That description alone is enough to show why so many people see Walker, Texas Ranger, as the television extension of that very same image. What matters is that the resemblance did not stop at the vibe. It went straight to the core of the character. Both McQuade and Cordell Walker are modern Western men, quiet, direct in their sense of justice, deeply tied to Texas, and always built as the kind of man who appears when normal systems fail to solve the problem. This was not a minor coincidence. It was practically the same character framework transferred from film to television. Because the similarity was so strong, the behind-the-scenes story becomes even more interesting. Based on the fact you had already locked in, Orion Pictures even considered suing CBS because the concept of Walker was so close to Lone Wolf McQuade. Even if it never turned into the kind of huge public legal war people still remember as a classic lawsuit, the very fact that the threat existed shows how close the two really were. But that is only the foundation, because even after the concept was in place, one of the men who helped create the series quickly grew to hate the direction it was taking. Number 2. The Oscar-winning co-creator who hated his own creation. One of the most surprising behind-the-scenes details is that Paul Haggis's name appears at the birth of Walker, Texas Ranger. This was not an unknown writer. Later, Haggis would become a major Hollywood name tied to Crash and Million Dollar Baby, two projects that helped place him among Oscar-winning writers and directors. That alone makes it notable that he co-created Walker in the first place. But what makes it even more striking is that he reportedly gave up after only about 2 weeks because he could not stand the direction CBS wanted the show to take. If that detail is accurate, as it has been told in behind-the-scenes accounts, then it reveals a very clear conflict from the earliest stage of the series. On one side, the writer's perspective. On the other, the network's demand for something broad, safe, and easy for a mass audience to consume. If Paul Haggis really did leave that quickly, then it tells you something very important. From the start, Walker was never meant to become a dark or complicated crime series in the artistic sense. It was designed to become a mass-market television product with a clear hero, clear morality, and very direct storytelling. Number 3. Breaking the death slot curse. In the American television system, Saturday night had long been considered one of the hardest time slots to win in. The reason was simple. A lot of people were out, dating, socializing, or doing anything other than sitting in front of the TV. For a major network like CBS, putting an action series on Saturday night sounded less like a favor and more like sending it into danger. And yet Walker, Texas Ranger did the exact opposite of what people expected. Instead of disappearing, it drew huge audiences and gradually became one of the shows most tightly associated with weekend nights on American television for years. This was not the kind of success that flashes for one season and disappears. It was the kind of success durable enough to make that time slot part of the series' identity. So what allowed Walker to do what so many other shows could not? The answer lies in the audience it was serving. This was an extremely easy show to watch. Each episode usually had a clear conflict, clear good and evil, quick resolution, and a central character familiar enough that the moment viewers tuned in, they knew exactly what kind of experience they were getting. But to build the sense of real Texas that made viewers believe in Walker's world, the production also made a decision that was much more demanding and very different from standard Hollywood practice. Number 4. Shot entirely in Texas. Walker, Texas Ranger was not a show pretending to be Texas. It was actually filmed in Texas, specifically in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That was a huge difference compared with many other American series of the time, where the setting of a particular state, city, or region was often recreated on California sets to save money and make production easier to control. With Walker, that choice created two very clear advantages. The first was authenticity of space. The roads, the light, the bars, the open land, the local architecture, and the general feel of the American South all came across much more naturally than they would have in a studio recreation. When Walker drove down the highway, stepped into a bar, or appeared in an outdoor crime scene, viewers felt Texas as a real place, not as a fake backdrop. The second was economic impact. The series brought millions of dollars and thousands of jobs to the local economy. That made Walker more than just a successful TV show. It became a production with real influence on an actual region. For Dallas-Fort Worth, that meant money, jobs, support services, technical crews, rented locations, and an entire chain of value that stayed active for years. Number 5. The Norris family ran the whole machine. Chuck Norris was not just the star standing in the middle of the frame. He was also an executive producer of Walker, Texas Ranger. That means his role did not stop at showing up on set, performing action scenes, and going home. He was deeply involved in how the series was run, shaped, and kept aligned with the image he wanted to build. But what made this machine even more unusual was the presence of Aaron Norris, Chuck Norris's brother. Aaron was not standing off to the side. He was an executive producer and directly directed many episodes himself. In other words, Walker was not just a series starring Chuck Norris. It was a series carrying the management and creative fingerprint of the Norris family at a very deep level. From a branding standpoint, that was a huge advantage. The Norris family almost controlled both the public image and the operational side of the series. They could protect it from changes that might take it too far away from its original identity. That is one reason Walker never became just another generic crime show. It always remained Chuck Norris's show in the most direct sense. And that level of control went even further. Starting with Season 2, even the opening song audiences heard each week was sung by Chuck Norris himself. Number 6. The theme song was sung by the star himself. Starting in the second season, Walker, Texas Ranger gained one detail that made it stick in viewers' memories much more powerfully. The opening song, Eyes of a Ranger, recorded and performed by Chuck Norris himself. This was not a small thing. For a major network television series in the 1990s, having the lead actor sing the theme song was a very direct act of brand building. Viewers did not even need to see Walker solving crimes yet. The moment they heard the melody and the voice during the opening, they knew exactly which world they were entering. The song carried a very clear Western flavor, from the arrangement to the spirit of the lyrics. It did not try to sound modern in the style of contemporary radio pop. On the contrary, it leaned hard into Texas, law, honor, and the image of a man acting according to his own principles. That is why the opening of each episode feels more like a declaration than a standard TV intro. From a branding perspective, it was an extremely smart move. Chuck Norris was not just present through his face, his body, and his kicks. He was also present through his voice. That made the connection between actor and character much tighter. For many viewers, Eyes of a Ranger was not just an opening theme. It felt almost like an extension of Cordell Walker himself. Number 7. A movie star who didn't want to do television. Today, it is no longer shocking when a movie star moves into long-form television. But in the early 1990s, the mindset was completely different. The big screen and the small screen were still seen by many people in the industry as two very different levels of prestige. For an action star who had already built a name in theaters, switching to a weekly television series could easily look like taking a step backward. That was exactly the feeling Chuck Norris reportedly had when he first approached Walker, Texas Ranger. Based on the fact you had already fixed in place, he initially turned down the script because he still thought of himself as a film actor, and long-running television was not the path he wanted. That matters, because it shows that Walker was not a project Chuck Norris grabbed immediately. He had to change the way he saw television before he truly committed to the series. The interesting thing is that the career move he once approached cautiously ended up becoming the most durable image of his life for mainstream American audiences. Many people cannot remember all of Chuck Norris's movie titles, but they remember Walker. They remember the hat, the truck, the badge, and the way he entered the frame. Number 8. A familiar Texas face from television. When Cherie J. Wilson joined the series as prosecutor Alex Cahill, Walker, Texas Ranger did not just gain an important female character. It also brought in a face American television audiences already knew from Dallas, one of the biggest television names of an earlier era. That gave the series a clear advantage in audience recognition. Viewers were not meeting a stranger. They were meeting an actress already tied to another iconic Texas-based TV world. That matters because it creates an interesting bridge between two generations of television. Dallas represented one kind of Texas television: wealth, families, power, and drama. Walker moved in another direction: action, law, and straightforward morality. But the fact that Cherie J. Wilson appeared in both gave audiences a subtle feeling of continuity. Texas on American television was still there, just with a different tone and a different center. Compared with many action shows of the same era, where female characters often faded into the background after a few episodes, Alex held a fairly solid place in the structure of the series. That is part of why Cherie J. Wilson became one of the faces people find hardest to separate from their memory of Walker. Number 9. A familiar face from blockbuster movies. In the memories of many Walker, Texas Ranger viewers, Jimmy Trevette is the faster-talking, more agile partner who balances out Cordell Walker's seriousness. But before wearing a Texas Ranger badge on television, Clarence Gilliard Jr. had already appeared in two very famous feature films, Top Gun and Die Hard. That matters because it shows that Walker was not just pulling in familiar television actors. It also brought in someone who had already left a mark on mainstream movie culture. In Top Gun, Gilliard was part of the young pilot ensemble. In Die Hard, he played Theo, the hacker in the terrorist crew, a supporting role, but a very memorable one because of his swagger and the way he fit into the larger plan. Those were two very different kinds of appearances, but both proved that he was not an unknown rookie when he entered Walker. That gave Jimmy Trevette an advantage right away. The audience might not instantly remember the actor's name, but they still had a sense that they had seen that face before. More importantly, Clarence Gilliard Jr. brought a very different energy into the series from Chuck Norris. If Walker was quiet, physical, and principle-driven, Trevette was more verbal, more flexible, and closer to a modern investigative style. That contrast kept the show from becoming too one-note. Number 10. The owner of CD's bar was recast at the last minute. One detail many viewers do not clearly remember is that C.D. Parker was not originally played by Noble Willingham. In the pilot, the character was played by Gaylord Sartain. Only afterward was he replaced by Noble Willingham, and that switch ended up giving the franchise one of its most memorable supporting faces. This is a classic example of how a pilot and a final series are not always locked into the exact same cast. A pilot is usually still a test phase. The network, producers, and creative team are still trying to see which characters truly fit the tone of the show. In the case of C.D. Parker, it is clear that the team decided they needed a different energy for the bar owner, someone who was part old friend, part emotional anchor, and part symbol of an older Texas standing behind Walker. Noble Willingham brought exactly what the show needed. He had the face, the voice, and the overall presence that matched the kind of weathered Texas man the series wanted. When he appeared in the bar, he did not feel like a supporting character squeezed in just to complete the cast. He felt like a natural part of Walker's world. That is why the recasting did not end up bothering viewers in the long term. In fact, many people do not even remember there was once another version of CD in the pilot. Number 11. A launchpad for future Hollywood stars. One of the great pleasures of revisiting long-running television shows from the 1990s is the surprise of recognizing very young faces who later became major stars. Walker, Texas Ranger is a perfect example. Over the years, the series featured many young actors in guest roles, supporting roles, or one-episode appearances before they became much bigger names in Hollywood. The three examples you pointed to are Tobey Maguire, Mila Kunis, and Haley Joel Osment. That tells us two things. First, Walker ran long enough and made enough episodes that it became a kind of transit station for young actors looking for television exposure in the American industry. In a procedural format, each episode usually introduces new characters, new families, new victims, new suspects. That structure creates a lot of room for young actors to get work. Second, it shows that at the time, major network television was still a very important place for actors to build their resume before breaking out in movies or other series. Tobey Maguire later became forever linked to Spider-Man. Mila Kunis became a familiar face in sitcoms, comedy films, and dramatic work. Haley Joel Osment quickly became world famous through The Sixth Sense. But before all of that, the fact that they passed through Walker adds another layer of interest when you look back at the series. It became a place where future major stars appeared very early in their careers. Number 12. Hiding a pregnancy with props. A real-life pregnancy during a long-running television series always creates a production problem. In the case of Walker, Texas Ranger, when Cherie J. Wilson became pregnant, the production team did not want to write that pregnancy into the series itself. That meant Alex Cahill would not suddenly be turned into a pregnant character just to match the actress's real life. Once they chose that path, the entire crew had to solve the problem visually by hiding her body within the frame. According to the fact you provided, they used a number of very specific tricks. Oversized jackets, stacks of folders held in front of her stomach, desks blocking the lower half of her body, and camera angles framed from the waist up. This is a classic television technique, but it requires careful coordination across the entire crew. One camera angle that dips too low, or one movement scene that is not planned precisely enough, and the whole concealment fails. What is interesting is that most viewers watching the original broadcasts probably never noticed much. A show like Walker moves quickly, focusing on the case and the action, so people are not usually stopping to analyze the visual composition of every frame. That is exactly why these small tricks worked so well. They allowed Alex's storyline to continue without the writers having to rebuild the structure around the actress's real-life pregnancy. Number 13. The slow-motion kick signature move. If you had to choose the single most iconic visual image from Walker, Texas Ranger, many people would not pick the badge or the Dodge Ram. They would pick Chuck Norris's slow-motion roundhouse kick. This went far beyond being just another fight move in the series. It became a visual signature for the entire brand. The moment audiences saw Walker turn, the camera shift, and the kick repeated in slow motion from multiple angles, they knew exactly what kind of show they were watching. What made this move special was not just its effectiveness in action scenes, it was the way the series turned it into a myth through repetition. Every time the kick appeared, the show was almost telling the viewer, this is the moment the argument ends, the chase ends, the case of the week ends. It became a visual exclamation point. How often was it used? So often that a younger generation did not even need to watch the full series to recognize Walker just from that kick. That is also why Walker's roundhouse became a meme before internet meme culture even fully exploded. People clipped it, parodied it, joked about it, and turned it into a symbol of the overly serious action hero who accidentally becomes funny when placed in a new context. Conan O'Brien's later Walker, Texas Ranger Lever segment tapped directly into that same energy. Number 14. The martial art. Chuck Norris created himself. One of the most important things to understand about the martial arts in Walker Texas Ranger is that Walker was not simply using movie fighting. According to the fact you provided, the character's techniques were built largely around Chun Kuk Do, the martial arts system created by Chuck Norris himself. That makes the series different from many other action shows, because the fighting style of the main character was not just staged to look cool. It was tied to a real martial discipline developed by the star at the center of the series. Chun Kuk Do has a strong foundation in Korean Tang Soo Do, but Chuck Norris expanded it in a more flexible direction based on his own experience in competition and teaching. By bringing that spirit into Walker, he was doing two things at once, preserving his own martial credibility and giving Cordell Walker a fighting identity that did not easily blend into other television action heroes. That mattered because Walker was never built as a series that relied mainly on guns or car chases. The show always wanted audiences to watch Chuck Norris's body in motion, how he turned, kept distance, threw a kick, or locked up an opponent. When the man at the center of the show is a real martial artist, the martial arts cannot be just an outer layer. Number 15. A core fact for understanding Walker, Texas Ranger, is that this show did not just have an action star in the middle of the frame. It also had a very strict moral gatekeeper behind the scenes, and that gatekeeper was Chuck Norris. According to the fact you supplied, he personally reviewed all scripts, refused vulgar language, did not want sex scenes, and insisted that every episode carry a clear moral lesson. That explains why Walker has such a different tone from many police or action series of the same era. By the 1990s, a lot of shows were starting to lean harder into moral gray areas, rougher language, or sexual content in order to feel more adult. Walker moved in the opposite direction. It kept very clear lines. The good guys and the bad guys were usually easy to identify. The action could be tough, but the moral universe was rarely very ambiguous. That helped the series widen its family audience. Parents knew they could turn it on Saturday night without worrying too much about language or explicit material. On the other hand, that same choice also caused some viewers and critics to see the show as too simple, too clean, or too preachy. In other words, Chuck Norris's moral philosophy was both one of the show's greatest brand strengths and one of its artistic limitations. Number 16. Conan O'Brien turned it into a meme machine. One of the strangest turning points in the cultural life of Walker, Texas Ranger did not happen on CBS. It happened on Conan O'Brien's late-night talk show. There, the Walker Texas Ranger lever became a famous recurring joke. Whenever Conan pulled the lever, a bizarre, over-the-top or very Walker action clip would play for the studio audience. The setup was simple, but the effect was enormous. What Conan was doing, in essence, was turning the series from a 1990s family action drama into a source of comedy clips for a younger audience. People who had never followed the show from the beginning, and in some cases had never sat through an entire episode, started to know Walker through these short edited moments. They were no longer meeting it the way their parents had. They were meeting it through exaggeration, through the kicks, through Chuck Norris's deadly serious face, and through the feeling that the show was so intense, it became entertaining in a completely different way. Number 17. An honorary lawman in real life. In 2010, then Texas Governor Rick Perry awarded Chuck Norris and Aaron Norris the title of Honorary Texas Ranger. That is not just some tiny detail added to make their resumes look good. It shows how strongly Walker Texas Ranger had fused the image of the Norris family with the most famous law enforcement symbol in Texas in the minds of the American public. Of course, no one confused television with reality. Chuck Norris was not a real Texas Ranger in the professional sense, and neither was Aaron Norris. But the symbolic power the series built over the years was so strong that the state of Texas was willing to use an honorary ritual to acknowledge that cultural impact. In other words, the series did not just make audiences believe in Walker. It also made the screen image of the Texas Ranger more familiar and more recognizable to the country at large. And if you are talking about Walker's symbolic screen image, you cannot avoid one very specific physical object, something repeated so often it became part of 1990s American masculinity on television: the Dodge Ram. Number 18. It helped sell trucks. Walker did not just have a badge and a spinning kick. He also had one of the strongest visual identity objects in the series, the Dodge Ram pickup truck. In the context of 1990s American television, this was not simply transportation for the character. It was part of the image. When Walker stepped out of that truck, the series was sending a very clear message about the kind of man it wanted to represent. Tough, practical, southern, tied to land, labor, and utility. The repeated visibility of the Dodge Ram in the series helped Chrysler significantly boost sales of that line during the 1990s. While the exact scale of the effect would need more detailed statistical work in a final research version, the cultural logic of it makes perfect sense. Major network television still had tremendous power at the time to shape mainstream consumer desire. An object appearing regularly in the hands of a beloved central character over many years almost automatically received enormous promotional value. Number 19. The most frustrating ending in the show's history. Officially, Walker, Texas Ranger ended on a positive note in 2001. Audiences could have assumed the story was over there. But then the network continued with the television movie Trial by Fire in 2005, and that film created one of the most frustrating endings for longtime fans. At the end, Alex Cahill is shot and collapses. After that, viewers never got a continuation to find out whether she lived, because any follow-up project was cancelled. This was exactly the kind of ending longtime fans found hard to accept, especially because Walker had spent years operating in a very clear, resolved style that rarely left viewers hanging. Alex was not a minor side character. She was one of the central faces of the entire franchise, both as Walker's emotional counterpart and as part of the long-running romantic thread the series had built over time. So to have her collapse from a gunshot and then never give the audience an answer felt like an extremely harsh interruption. And maybe it is partly because of that unresolved gap that Hollywood eventually came back to the name years later, but in a very different way. Number 20. Revived after 20 years. In 2021, the brand was rebooted as Walker, starring Jared Padalecki. The fact that the name Walker still had enough value to be rebooted after around 2 decades already says a great deal about the strength of the brand. Not every 1990s television series gets granted a second life like that. However, the 2021 version did not try to copy Chuck Norris's original version exactly. That is the most important difference. The reboot leaned much more heavily into character psychology, family trauma, and modern drama. It kept the name Walker and the connection to Texas, but greatly reduced the element that had once been the soul of the original's pop cultural identity. The feeling that a nearly unbeatable hero would end each episode with a slow-motion kick and a very clear moral lesson. Compared with the original, that was a strategic difference. American television in 2021 was not the same as major network television in the mid-1990s. Audiences had grown used to more wounded characters, heavier family plots, and deeper internal conflict. So the reboot had to change in order to survive in that environment. It could not simply drag the old formula back unchanged and expect viewers to accept it. Out of these 20 facts about the 8-year journey of Walker, Texas Ranger, which detail makes you appreciate this hero the most? Leave your thoughts in the comments so we can look back together and honor Chuck Norris's remarkable life. And if you want to keep going with me as we uncover behind-the-scenes secrets, untold corners, and the legacy of screen legends who have become immortal, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell.